We've been waiting the entirety of Volume 9 thus far for RWBY's emotions to be addressed, and it looks like that is going to have to happen soon. Not only because we're reaching the end of the volume, but because things are now out in the open, and there is more than one character that is drowning in trauma. This episode, in general, deals with some very sensitive topics, so fair warning as we progress through this review. These topics are absolutely no joke and are very real, even though they are addressed in the form of the Ever After. But with that being said, I will also say spoiler warning for those who have not seen Episode 7 of RWBY Volume 9. I won't be showing the episode or any clips from it, simply images of the episode and analyzing the events that take place. I'll leave a link in the description below so you guys can go to Crunchyroll and support the series there. Now, the episode starts off as everyone is soundly asleep in Jaune's hut, all except for RWBY. And it's not Yang's snoring that's keeping her awake. She's lying there staring at her weapon. She's probably been lost in her own thoughts since she got her weapon back, and probably hasn't even slept at all throughout the night. Which likely also plays a factor in her actions later in this episode. But everyone else isn't asleep for long, as we see a lantern being lit, and then the explosions to follow. Jaune then waking up in a panic at the sound of this explosion, saying that he's late, he's late, he's late! An obvious reference to the White Rabbit from the Alice in Wonderland story. Now, I don't think that's Jaune's actual inspiration in this world, this more just being a reference to the White Rabbit. And what is he late for, Team RWBY asked? Well, that would be the disastrous lighting of the paper lantern, as we see the village that Jaune resides in, or rather, that he resides over and protects. He rushes off to go help and tells Team RWBY to make their way to the village as well, because we can see it's currently on fire. And this is where we are introduced to Paper Town, where quite literally everything from the houses to the villagers themselves is made of paper. And Team RWBY, as they get to the town, is greeted by one of these such residents, where that individual asks what Team RWBY is, again with that same question, what are you? But this time it is asked so that the individual can better serve Team RWBY. And of course this confuses them because, wait, you're wanting to serve us? Your town is quite literally on fire. But they have nothing to worry about because their hero is there, as Jaune jumps over the building with a bucket of water and promptly puts out the fire. And this is when Jaune formally introduces us to his people, the origami people known as the Paper Pleasers, likely the kindest afterins that exist in the Ever After, from everything that we've seen and probably that we're going to see in the scope of Volume 9. Jaune says that these things happen all the time, quite literally every single day. It seems the course of events repeats. There's a fire every morning, and Jaune normally doesn't sleep in, but given the excitement of the day before, meeting Team RWBY, finally reuniting, he did oversleep, and thus it could have been a disaster, but it was prevented thanks to Jaune. And it is Jaune who looks after them every single day, obsessively. They are a clumsy people, according to Jaune, but that makes them predictable. Since they are made of paper, though, literally everything from fire to water is a danger to their very existence. And so he does everything in his power to prevent them from orchestrating their own demise. Even so much as stepping in a puddle is a danger to them. And Jaune explains why he is protecting them. That after Alex had left him to die, Juniper brought him to the Paper Pleasers, and they were the ones to get him back up on his feet. Which is notable because we did not see Juniper in Jaune's retelling of Alex and Lewis's story, but apparently Juniper was already there. So that idea that Lewis or Alex may have been turned into Juniper is kind of thrown out the window if Juniper was there at the same time as Alex and Lewis. But from that point on, Jaune took upon himself the duty of protecting the Paper Pleasers, and also took up the responsibility of naming each and every one of them, after the people he knows. This only realized after Jaune refers to one of the Pleasers as Ren, and then another one of them greets Team RWBY and introduces themselves as RWBY. Yang aptly points out that that's quite creepy. So, you know that entire idea that I mentioned at the end of the last review, that in Jaune's village it would be kind of funny if he was just surrounded by a group of coconuts and he was just talking to himself in his insanity from being left alone for all these years? Well, that's not entirely inaccurate. All of these origami people are named after the people that Jaune has known throughout his life, and he is obsessively protecting them. So, when the cat said in the last episode that Jaune is a few berries short of a picnic, he wasn't exactly wrong. Jaune is definitely not okay. But since this first disaster of the day was prevented, the lighting of the lantern, he says there's still time before the Pebble Tower collapses and breaks the dam, which would flood the village. So time for brunch! This is just the everyday life that Jaune has gotten used to, and Team RWBY can see the flaws in that, as Jaune then shows them his life's work. He lays out a map on the table that shows all of the different acres in the Ever After, only a couple of them actually being named. In particular, the one that says Blob might be very interesting, though I doubt we're going to see many of these different acres. And hopefully we don't see the one that's named Stinky Cheese. Although Little may want to go there, depending on Little's preference of the different type of cheeses that exist, I don't know if that would exactly be the most pleasant acre. And the volcano one also sounds dangerous, but then there's also a cake one. The Ever After is such a wild and wondrous place. We did see a number of these different acres when Team RWBY first looked out upon the world of the Ever After, but this is what Jaune has been doing for all of these years, systematically searching each of these acres to try to find a way to get back home. Unfortunately, he hasn't turned up anything yet, but this is his plan. He is going to go out searching while Team RWBY can stay and protect the paper pleasers. And Jaune pulls out a massive list of all of the disasters that take place every single day. Multiple pages taped together. It's quite an interesting read, to be honest, including at least 3 separate fires throughout the day, a potential flood, the paper pleasers using metal rods as lightning rods during a thunderstorm, and also something called the unfoldening, which, given that they are origami people, you can only imagine what that implies. Also, you can't forget, you need to help Pyrrha with her homework. Many different individuals of the paper pleasers named after the people Jaune knew are mentioned in this overall document, I guess. We have Neptune, we have Ren, we have Nora, and of course, we have Pyrrha. And I'm curious to know what Jaune's mentality was when he was naming each and every one of them, because when he eventually chose the name of Pyrrha for one of them, that must have been a pretty important paper pleaser to Jaune. Perhaps the one that did take care of him the most and nurse him back to health, or just the one that Jaune wanted to help more than any other. Because of how much Pyrrha helped him throughout his life, he wanted to, in his own way, repay that help that Pyrrha gave him. And he wants Team RWBY to temporarily take over his duties of protecting the village and preventing all of these different things, handing them that massive to-do list so that he can go with Juniper to search for a way out, to be able to get to further acres, and hopefully one of them will be the answer that he's searching for. He knows he can find a way out. He has to. He ends up slamming his fist on the table and says that he knows he can. And then he says, I'm not crazy. This isn't crazy. He's just been dealing with a lot, having to protect the paper pleasers from everything on that list, as well as waiting and searching for Team RWBY and trying to find a way out of this world. He's been living a very busy life that has definitely taken its toll on Jaune. And Jaune goes off to get prepared, and this gives Team RWBY a moment to talk. Yang isn't exactly pleased with the task that Jaune is trying to give them, but Blake says that Jaune needs us. And when she says that, the camera pans over to RWBY, who's looking increasingly frustrated. No one seems to notice except for Little. And then Weiss aptly points out that they need Jaune. They need a guide. Otherwise, something in the Ever After is going to take them out, or the tree will kill them, or worse. And this is when one of the paper pleasers comes up and says, no, the tree doesn't actually kill. It allows us to be remade into something else. And this particular pleaser opens up about their situation that they've probably been living in for years. The paper pleasers have fulfilled their purpose. Their job is to take care of the world around them, and they've completed their task. The acre that they live on is immaculate, but it's made out of paper. And all of the paper pleasers desperately want to ascend, to go to the tree and be remade so that they can hopefully make something longer lasting, because paper just doesn't last that long. Whenever they've brought up the idea, Jaune prevents them from doing that, because he is clever. He is their hero. They tried reaching out to the tree, and Jaune stopped them. One of the members of their village had the idea of unmaking themselves, pulling out scissors in a village of origami people. So you can obviously tell what they were suggesting. And given the list that Jaune has, this was apparently Neptune and his scissors. But Jaune took the scissors away. And upon learning this information, that list that Jaune pulled out before, of all the disasters that are befalling this village, is seen in a different light. This isn't just a village filled with peril, this is a village where the citizens are trying to bring that peril upon themselves. Not all of them, though, as I think the one about the goose might be something out of their control, but if it's also something that happens every single day, I'm curious how that works. But the paper pleasers are the ones who start the fires in the morning. They are the ones who topple the tower to try to flood the village. They are the ones who walk out into lightning storms carrying metal rods in hopes that they can ascend whichever way they can. And Jaune is desperately, obsessively protecting them from that. The paper pleasers simply want to return home. And upon the paper pleaser saying that, we can see RWBY visibly wince. But with this new information, Team RWBY realizes that Jaune's not exactly right in the head, that he doesn't know what happened to Lewis. Neither does the cat. No one seems to have accurate information about what actually happens at the tree, something that I made a video about earlier this week. So they need to convince Jaune to let the paper pleasers go, and Weiss mentions that it might be difficult because he's not exactly all there. And Jaune hears this. Is that what you think? And he storms out of the house. And although they try to talk to Jaune, saying that, well, maybe the cat was right about a couple of things, not everything, but something, and Jaune then kind of starts to snap. He says that everyone in the Ever After is either too clever, too stupid, or too crazy to trust. This while surrounded by his village of paper pleasers, and they're not exactly happy to hear that. It's certainly cruel to refer to the people that he's been protecting all this time as one of those three things. And so, Team RWBY asks him, why do you care so much? It's because these are the people that he can actually save. And there is the key to Jaune's trauma. He has not been able to save anyone. Especially the end of Volume 8, when he could have saved Penny, when that was what he was trying to do, save the people of Atlas. Instead, he ended up taking Penny's life. And that's something that has been weighing on him so much. But they don't really have time to address this at the moment, as the horde of Jabberwockers that they encountered at the garden now comes and destroys Jaune's house. And of course, everyone realizes that if the Jabberwockers make it to the paper pleasers, then none of them will ever be able to ascend. So Jaune rushes into battle, followed by Weiss, Blake, and Yang. But RWBY stays behind, unsure of what to do. Even earlier in the episode, when she was first leaving Jaune's hut, she left her weapon behind. She was told by the rest of her team to go get it, but she brushed it off as just saying, oh, just woke up, early in the morning, but we know that she didn't sleep. Her weapon is causing trauma. Entering into battle is bringing up the trauma that RWBY has experienced. And as this fight is taking place, we can see how sturdy these Jabberwockers are. Jaune and Weiss are fighting together, and Blake and Yang are fighting together. It seems to be a pretty hard-fought battle, each of them seeming to struggle a little bit against these Jabberwockers because they are not Neo's normal illusions that they are used to. They are much more sturdy, taking many hits before they actually go down and disappear. And notably in this battle, we also see that Jaune's shield still has gravity dust in it. Given the fact that it's been 30 years, give or take, that's pretty impressive. Either Jaune has, rationed it and not used it that much, so he has some left now to use it. Or it could be that when the dust was forged into his shield, that it gave the continuous use from there on out. Still a little bit of an unknown when it comes to dust. Then the camera zooms in on RWBY, and we see the fear in her eyes. She's afraid to enter into this battle. But she's forced to, as a Jabberwocker appears right beside her and begins to attack her. She tries to dodge out of the way, but when she points her rifle at it, she cannot pull the trigger, and is easily overwhelmed by it as darkness seems to consume her vision, and she starts to see flashbacks of the traumatic experiences of her past. We also get to see the Jabberwocker with the head of Cinder, and that's a terrifying image in and of itself, but RWBY is momentarily brought back to facing Cinder at the crossroads, to seeing Penny outside the Schnee Manor as she's being taken a hold of by the virus. And finally, she sees Salem confronting her face to face. Now, if we look at each of these traumatic moments that RWBY was brought back to, Cinder makes sense. She fought her in the Crossroads. And then earlier, she had to fight against her friend, against Penny at the Schnee Manor. But the only time that she ever saw Salem face to face, outside of course, the illusion that was brought forth by Emerald Semblance at the end of Volume 5, the only time that RWBY has seen Salem was in Ironwood's office. And that is when Salem told RWBY that her mother came to face her and failed. That her mother said those exact same words to her. And she was wrong too. This, I believe, is the deepest source of RWBY's trauma. I made a video on this as well earlier in the week, but this moment is very telling. Although it has been a few years since we saw this moment on screen back in Volume 7, we have to realize that this only happened. All of these 3 moments only took place within the last few days for RWBY. This trauma is very new, very fresh, and RWBY is scared. She is not okay, and that is extremely apparent here. The Jabberwocker then rips open its mouth and looks like it's about to consume RWBY, but the rest of her team make it in time to save her. They knock the Jabberwocker out of the way, and it transforms into an image of Neo that points at RWBY and does the whole finger gun thing. In other words, you're my target. You're the one I'm after. And then the illusion disappears. And after it does, the battle is over. And Yang points out that these weren't Neo's normal tricks. She has gotten a lot stronger. What happened? She's saying the exact same thing I've been saying ever since we saw Neo back at the end of episode 3 of Volume 9, that her semblance is insanely strong in the Ever After. This is not a normal semblance evolution. This is not the normal power increase. She is way stronger than she was before. Though that isn't really addressed at the moment because Jaune is quite frustrated with RWBY. Although she may not want to protect the village, she could at least protect her friends. Jaune picks up RWBY's weapon and tries to hand it to her, but as he does so, RWBY recoils backwards and her weapon falls to the ground. And everyone is quite shocked by this, finally realizing that RWBY may not be okay. But again, they don't really have the time to address it at that very moment because then the ground starts to shake again. The pebble tower that was standing in the village begins to fall. And Jaune starts to freak out. What time is it? No, no! And the tower falls, breaks the dam, and the entire village is flooded. The Paper Pleasers finally succeeded in their mission of ascending by whatever way necessary. They decided to end their own existence to be sent back to the tree and reborn into something else. And for Jaune, the one who has spent many years, day after day, trying to prevent this very outcome, it's devastating. He says that they are all gone, that they're all dead. And Weissblick and Yang trying to comfort him, saying, this is what they wanted. They're not dead, they're going to be reborn. Right, RWBY? And this is where RWBY finally breaks. Oh, you're looking to me for an answer now? Why am I supposed to be the leader? Why am I always the one that's supposed to come up with an answer? Why does she always have to be the one to pick others up? What about her? Oh, right, we need to help Jaune. Jaune's the one who needs our help right now. Or we need to sort out our feelings. Oh, congratulations, by the way. She's starting to lash out at everyone around her. And frankly, her actions do make sense given all of the stress that she's under, the lack of sleep, as I mentioned before, and the fact that she has been struggling for so long and no one noticed. But in that same vein, RWBY's also being a little bit unfair, I think. Her anger and frustration is justified, but not only is everyone else dealing with their own issues, RWBY didn't say anything. It is okay to say that you're hurting. It is okay to not be okay. And I think that's something that RWBY will still have to understand, that she can ask for help. Just because she's the leader and that people look to her for advice and for leadership and to help others, it doesn't mean that she can't also be helped. But There is so much going on in her mind right now, and she's feeling so much pressure that well, she's just not thinking clearly. And then, in her anger, she says something that's gonna be hard to forgive, I think. She says, "Oh, sorry, is this not a good time? Should we be mourning Jaune's make-believe friends?" The people that Jaune has been protecting for these last couple decades, probably, possibly, and they are real people in the ever after. They aren't make-believe. This isn't some fake world. These are real things that is happening here. And, you know, when RWBY said that, that made me lose some sympathy for her. And I think, of course, that's the intent. Because RWBY is confused, she's lashing out, she's saying things that hopefully she doesn't mean. But, of course, this really gets under Jaune's skin. "Oh, what about you? This only happened because the Jabberwockers were after you. We are only in the Ever After because it was your plan that failed. It is all about you." And we see that tears start welling up in RWBY's eyes. But Jaune's reaction is very understandable in this moment. His words did go a bit too far, but given that RWBY spat pretty much on everything that he's been trying to do for the past couple years and called the people that he was protecting make-believe, like, I'm sorry, RWBY kind of deserved that, in my opinion. Like, that was way too far. Jaune went too far as well, and Weiss tells him as much, just like, "Hey, Jaune," and he's like, I know, I'm sorry, and he openly admits that he's like, "I'm not okay. I know I'm not okay, but how am I supposed to be?" He's been alone for so long. On that bridge, he was the only one who could do it. Referring, of course, to being the one who took Penny's life. And that's something that he's going to have to live with, whether he's in the Ever After or back in the real world. He has to live with that. And from what I can see, Weiss's reaction is one of understanding, and Blake and Yang don't seem to know exactly what Jaune is referring to, but obviously it's something that happened after they fell. He doesn't explicitly say that he was the one who took Penny's life. He said that he was the only one who could do it. Weiss knows exactly what Jaune is talking about, but I don't think Blake, Yang, or RWBY do at this moment. Because if they did, I feel like RWBY would have had a few more things to say. Blake tries to calm down the situation, though, by saying, "Look, I know things don't seem great right now, but..." And she's cut off by RWBY, who tells her to shut up before she can finish. Blake was trying to lighten the mood, try to keep things positive, but RWBY just doesn't want that right now. Just don't. And then she grabs her weapon and takes off over the trees using her semblance, leaving behind the rest of her team and Jaune. And this is the note that the episode ends off on. And this, by far, is the heaviest episode of Volume 9, and, well, I don't want to say the entirety of RWBY, because we did have an entire kingdom brought to its knees and destroyed last volume, but for Team RWBY in particular, and for RWBY in particular, and Jaune, this is an incredibly heavy episode. The entire situation of Jaune protecting the paper pleasers, desperately wanting to protect people who don't want to be saved, who want to be allowed to die. That directly parallels what happened in the Crossroads with Penny. Jaune has been dealing with this trauma, has been reliving it day after day for years, desperately trying to save these people, trying to save the papers pleasers in an effort to try to make amends, make up for, come to terms with the actions that he took at the end of Volume 8. It was the necessary thing to do to pass on the Winter Maiden powers to Winter, and so that, you know, the battle could continue to be fought and more lives could be saved, and potentially the relics as well, though that didn't exactly work out. It is a trauma that Jaune has to live with, and is something that he's been living with for so long now. We saw this in the Ponderstorm last episode. In the reflections of the water, Jaune saw Penny, as well as his younger self. Meaning, He's been dealing with the trauma of taking Penny's life for all of those years since he was still young until now. He wasn't able to save Lewis, and that's why he's so fixated on the tree being a place of death, a place of no return. And now he's desperately trying to save whoever he can. And the Paper Pleasers were the ones that he could save until Team RWBY showed up. And yes, although it was the Jabberwockers that were after RWBY in particular, it was Jaune who took Team RWBY to his village. It wasn't like they forced their way in and said, we're sleeping here tonight. He brought them there. So it's not really RWBY's fault that the Jabberwockers were there. Sure, they were after her, but Jaune brought her there. So, that's unfair of him to put that on RWBY. And it's unfair to put the entirety of the plan on RWBY either. Sure, she was the one who came up with the idea, but really, they all agreed to it. No one could come up with a better plan, and it was a good plan. It's just, how do you account for Cinder using the Relic of Knowledge to figure out their plan? There was no way to anticipate that. There was no way to know, and, well, the plan went awry. Out of no fault of their own. They did the best that they could with the situation that they had. So Jaune was definitely unfair with the things he said to RWBY, but I don't blame him for saying those things given what RWBY just said to him. Disavowing everything that he's worked for these last few years. And although it might have been in vain, it was part of Jaune's overall trauma. There is so much to unpack with this episode. The frustration and anger and fear that RWBY has been feeling this entire time. From the last, seriously, less than a week of her life has been filled with so much trauma. From learning that her mother went to face Salem, that Salem is using Silver-Eyed warriors to create grim monstrosities, and that possibly happening to her mother, that her mother being the trigger that's changed something. And then her friend, Penny, that she was finally reunited with, she had to watch suffer, had to fight against, and now lost due to Cinder attacking her in the crossroads. All of this has built up over such a short time, and RWBY can't handle it. In that video I made earlier this week about addressing the trauma that RWBY has and how it's likely largely centered around Summer Rose, there were a couple people in the comments below that pointed out that RWBY is still 2 years younger than everyone around her, and that is likely a contributing factor to the issues that RWBY has. She is 2 years younger, has less experience, and isn't as mentally able as the rest of her team to handle all of the trauma and pressure that she's under. She was put in the position of leader, so things are definitely weighing on her a little bit more than the others. And I think it's more the point that she's been made leader rather than, just being 2 years younger. Though her age might definitely be a factor. Just because she's a leader, it doesn't mean that her team should automatically assume that she's okay. They need to be looking out for each other, which, they haven't exactly been doing all that well since they came to the Ever After. They've all had these shared traumatic experiences in Volume 8, but they are affecting each of them differently, and RWBY seems to be taking it harder than everyone else. And they've only now realized, possibly as it's too late, because RWBY has now taken off on her own. And with her being on her own, maybe she'll encounter the Curious Cat again, who will take her to the tree. Maybe she'll be captured by the Jabberwockers. Maybe she'll find Neo, or maybe she'll do something else in her anger and frustration that maybe she won't be able to take back. We are getting into the final 3 episodes of Volume 9, and things are only going to get heavier from here. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. These next few episodes are going to be extremely telling for the rest of our characters and how they will be able to face everything upon returning to Remnant, who will actually return and what state they will actually return in. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about, well, all of it and everything that happened in this episode. If you guys enjoyed this video, want to see more like it, more RWBY theories, more RWBY reviews, make sure to subscribe and join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. If you like No Game No Life, make sure to check out my second channel, The Daily Flugel. And if you want to see some games played live or just talk RWBY in general, I stream on Twitch every Tuesday and Saturday. Link in the description below. And I'll see you guys in the next video.